Hello, and welcome to another episode of It's a History Podcast. I am your host, Madison, and this week we will be looking at the history of summer vacation. You may have heard the notion that summer vacation that we have today is based on the farming needs of the U.S. in the past, but that is not really the case. The history of summer vacation as we know it today, while rooted in the academic calendar, can actually be traced back to our Gilded Age friends of the late 19th century and the root of many of our American traditions, capitalism. Before we get into the capitalism of it all, let's take a look first at just where we all seem to have this false idea that summer vacation was based on agriculture. While it is true that rural children would be required to help on familial farms during harvest times, these times would have been shorter stints in the fall and the spring. These breaks would have coincided with the planting and the harvesting time periods. And when you look at urban schools, they had a very different school schedule compared to the rural schools, but they also included the summer break that we know today. In fact, in 1842, public schools in New York actually had 284 open days, where today's schools are only open for 180 learning days. We also have to remember that this is the time before air conditioning. So wealthy families and eventually middle-class families would escape this city heat during the summer, which in turn would make sense that the schools would be closed during the summer break. By the late 19th century, there was a push for all schools, both rural and urban, to be on the same school schedule, which resulted in the Summer Vacation Compromise, which, knowing the spring and fall needs of the rural families, does not really coincide with the farming schedule that we all still generally believe to be the reason for our summer vacation. But the summer vacation that we think about is more in line with the wealthiest of the wealthy. Our Gilded Age friends, those who vacationed in towns like Newport in Rhode Island and Saratoga in New York, created the idea of summer vacation. Before the rich and the wealthy started summering, May, June, July, and August were just the hottest months of the year. But eventually, these areas were preferred by rich plantation owners in the South as a way to escape the southern heat and also as a way to escape disease outbreaks such as malaria or yellow fever. It was these southern plantation owners that built the first of the summer quote-unquote cottages in Newport. And when I say cottages, just know I am talking about a mansion-sized second home, not a cozy residence. After the Civil War, though, the Southerners were not as welcome in the summering towns of Newport and Saratoga, and this made way for the industrialist families like the Vanderbilts and the Astors to take up home in these towns. These wealthy families would put down the cash needed for architects to design some of the most impressive buildings where they would host lavish galas and balls in a 6-week summer period where everyone vacationed at the same time. This summer social season was very important for the young marriage-age girls and families to make the right connection for their children to keep a strong family line. During the Great Depression, when many of these families lost a sizable amount of their fortune, some of these homes were torn down or converted into apartments. But concerned philanthropists Catherine Warren of the Preservation Society of Newport County and Doris Duke of the Newport Restoration Foundation were actually able to save many of these homes and restore them, many of which have been opened up and available for the public to tour. If you have any interest in learning more about the Gilded Age and some of the people who vacationed in these towns, episodes 46 through about 60 of my backlog focus on the Gilded Age with people like the Astors, the Vanderbilts, and Jenny Jerome Churchill, and some other smaller episodes just about the Gilded Age in general. But back to summer vacations. Over time, with the heavy hand of capitalism, summer vacation eventually trickled down from the 1% and down to the rest of us. Going back to 1869, the New York Times had noticed amongst the working professionals a growing sentiment of the quite sadly overdriven businessman. Here is a quote about the late 19th century businessman. "From one year's end to another he lives, for the most part in a breathless hurry. If any folk in the wide world have need for a summer refreshment, it is we." With this sentiment and the rise in tourism, summer was starting to be perceived, quote, a season of rest from all care. By the turn of the 20th century, summer as an entity had become more ingrained into popular American culture as advertisers started to get their hands on the concept of summer. Musicians and authors used the summer as a way to tell stories, often including the themes of nostalgia or even romance. Even companies like Kodak would attract customers with a campaign that made their cameras a way for, quote, telling the story of a summer vacation. The early 20th century was also the time where we saw the rise in unions and cities faced with overcrowding. urban planners actually began to plan activities for the working class. Cities such as Atlantic City would become a traveling destination for those close by. This is also where the rise of Coney Island and Jones Beach would come into play. These kinds of destinations would become popular with the workers from the cities and their families, especially with the momentum in the labor movement that brought on breaking up the day into 3 8-hour segments. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for sleep, and 8 hours for what we will. I have included a link in the description for our website to Time magazine that has quite the collection of images from the 1940s from a Cape Cod vacation, and they embody that classic image of a post-war time with middle-class people enjoying their time. The images certainly provoke a feeling of nostalgia, much like how the advertisers from the turn of the century wanted summer vacation to feel like, an idealized form of leisure that was accessible to some, but not all. When looking at summer vacation, we must also look at the dichotomy of who was able to have a vacation. A majority of the individuals who benefited from the union wins and the ability to experience leisure were white. The new summer tourist industry was staffed largely by the Black and brown people who were not afforded the same luxuries as their white neighbors. For many, many summers, working-class Black and brown people would travel to the nation's growing beach resort towns to work rather than enjoy. In the early decades of the 20th century, workers at these resorts reported crammed living conditions, insufficient food, and were even banned from enjoying the beach associated with the hotel they were working at during the day. The advent of middle-class individuals being able to enjoy what had previously only been enjoyed by the richest was joined by an increase in low-paying service jobs that generally only lasted for a summer season. And this is something that we can still see today, especially in those small beach towns across the coast, where the summer is bustling with business, but as soon as Labor Day hits, the business takes a steep dive down, with some operations choosing to only open during these peak summer months and stay dormant for the remainder of the year. And with that, I'm going to end today's episode. I hope you learned something new about the origins of summer vacation, from School Calander Compromise to Working Class Revolution with a dash of Gilded Age influence. Sources for today's episode include an article from PBS titled Agrarian Roots, Think Again, Debunking the Myth of Summer Vacation's Origins by Sakia, Melker, and Sam Weber, an article from Time magazine titled A Brief History of Summer Vacation by Jackson Murphy. This is the article with the images from the 40s. And an article from History.com titled How Newport's Gold Coast Became a Hotspot for Gilded Age Elites by Dave Roos. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you liked what you heard, head over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave a review. If you have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, you can email me at itsahistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also find me over on Instagram and Threads at It's a History Podcast. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode, and I hope to have you in the next one.